She asked about a premium car when she entered the showroom in jeans and a basic white t-shirt. The salesman regarded her with contempt, saying, "I'm sorry, but I think you're in the wrong place." The next morning, a gleaming Rolls Royce Phantom pulled up outside the dealership when the back door opened, leaving the salesman speechless. He never saw it coming. The prestigious Boston luxury motors sparkled under the morning light, and the glass walls displayed a fleet of exotic vehicles that most people would only dream of owning, each more expensive than the last Margaret Collins. He sneered and gestured towards the exit, saying that these vehicles start at $300,000. Other staff members laughed, and customers stared at her face, flushed with embarrassment. Maggie, to those who knew her, stepped through the doors, her brown ponytail bouncing slightly with each step. Her simple white t-shirt, well-worn jeans, and minimal makeup reflected a woman who valued practicality over presentation. At 35, she exuded a quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was, what wasn't. Apparent from her modest appearance was that Maggie was the founder and driving force behind the Collins Foundation for Children with Disabilities, an organization that had transformed thousands of young lives. Years before meeting her now husband, she had built the foundation from nothing, pouring her heart and education in special needs development into creating real change. As she entered the showroom, her eyes immediately fell on a sleek, midnight blue coupe, perfect for her sister's 40th birthday. Caroline had always dreamed of owning a luxury car, and after beating breast cancer last year, Maggie wanted to give her something truly special. She could easily afford it. Her foundation success and personal investments had made her comfortable in her own right. Though few knew that across the showroom, as a sales manager, Blake Thompson took pride in his ability to identify serious customers at first glance. When he saw Maggie wearing casual attire, he smoothed his navy suit jacket and adjusted his blue tie. He grinned and nodded to his co-workers, saying, "This would be an amusing good morning," when a young salesperson named Daniel came up to greet her and say, "Welcome to Boston Luxury Motors." Maggie grinned. "I'm Daniel." Before Maggie can reply, "Is there anything in particular you're interested in today?" When Blake answered, "I'll take care of this, Daniel," he turned to Maggie with a rehearsed smile that stopped short of his eyes and asked for instructions, "Ma'am." And with that, Maggie's day at the dealership started, a day that would truly alter everyone's viewpoints. Maggie gave a kind response. She gestured to the 285K car on the raised platform, saying, "I'm interested in that midnight blue coupe." With the end of Manon quotas approaching and 3 serious buyers anticipated that afternoon, Blake Thompson's smile tightened as he said, "Maybe I could direct you to our used car division. They're in a separate building about 3 blocks east," he said, emphasizing each word as if speaking to a child. "I had no time for fantasies because that's the limited edition Azure. Only 15 were made this year." Maggie saw how his gaze flitted over her plain clothes, lingering on her worn-out trainers. She was used to such criticisms. Most people were unaware that she purposefully chose this lifestyle, finding simplicity and freedom despite having access to enormous wealth. "I'd really like to know more about this one," she persisted politely. "Is it possible to see the interior?" Behind him, Blake's expression soured. Blake's demeanor changed instantly when a couple wearing designer clothes entered. "Excuse me," but he said to Maggie, "Why don't you take a brochure?" without really looking at her. 2 salesmen exchanged knowing glances. "The Azure is by appointment only," and he lied smoothly. "Our serious clients usually schedule private viewings. Daniel can assist you with that." He walks over to greet Mr. and Mrs. Harrington with their arms extended. "Great to see you once more." The younger salesman, Daniel, who couldn't have been older than 25, came up to Maggie with a regretful smile. "I'm sorry about that," he began quietly, adding that his suit appeared to be too big. "Would you like me to tell you about Azure?" "I would be grateful." Maggie answered as Daniel excitedly went over the features of the car. Maggie saw Blake escorting the elegantly attired pair straight to the Azure. He opened the door floridly and invited Mrs. Harrington to sit in the same vehicle he had claimed was for an appointment, but that's okay. Maggie gave the now uncomfortable Daniel, "I am aware of how these functions operate across the showroom." Blake was following his well-practiced sales process. "This specific model has an 8-month waiting list, but I have one reserved for special clientele." Mrs. Harrington touched the interior leather, which is exquisite, but I'm not sure what color it is. "We could definitely talk about custom choices." Maggie approached discreetly, staying within earshot, and Blake reassured her. "Pardon me." She stated, "I wanted to ask about buying this model." Blake responded, hardly controlling his annoyance. "Maybe you could come back another time, or as I suggested, check our used car options." His countenance brightened as I explained earlier that this vehicle was being presented to these consumers. The pair appeared uncomfortable seeing Blake and Maggie together. Maggie mentioned calmly that "I'm particularly interested in this car for my sister's birthday next month." Blake moved away from the Harringtons, lowering his voice. "Look, I know people like to dream, but this is a place of business and that car will cost more than most homes. I've been patient, but you're interfering with a legitimate sale." A number of adjacent patrons had paused to see the awkward encounter. Daniel lingered on the edge in a worried manner. "I'm ready to make a cash buy today," Maggie remarked calmly, and that's when Blake's professional facade fell apart. He laughed, making a short, loud noise that reverberated around the showroom floor, and several heads turned to make a cash purchase. He gestured dismissively at her attire, saying, "I believe my money is as good as anyone else's," quietly. "Really?" His voice was louder now, designed to humiliate. "This isn't a yard sale. We're talking about a quarrel of $1 million. People who can afford these cars don't dress like that." Maggie experienced this treatment before, but for anyone who had ever been judged by their appearance, her cheeks flushed not out of embarrassment, but rather from a slowly building rage. To be clear, Blake moved closer, towering over her, and stated, "No longer bothering to hide your disdain, you are wasting my time and embarrassing yourself. Either make an appointment for a serious discussion, dress appropriately, or please leave the premises." The Harringtons had moved away from the car and the showroom had become quiet. "Is there something wrong?" The proprietor of the dealership, Richard Mason, was drawn to the uproar and added a new voice to the discussion. Blake explained to this woman that we only work by appointment for serious buyers, and he adjusted his tie without any issues. Taking in Maggie's straightforward appearance and the onlookers, Richard Mason swiftly evaluated the situation. His face made it obvious which side he was on. "I see," he remarked. "Collins. Ms. Maggie provided Margaret Collins with Ms. Collins. I completely appreciate that our clients usually grasp the exclusivity of our vehicles, so maybe there has been a misunderstanding." Even though she was feeling humiliated, Maggie answered calmly, "Your sales manager has made your policies quite clear." Blake took another step forward. His tone was brimming with disdain. "If you're truly interested, which I doubt you are, you may schedule an appointment, but I'd advise bringing cash and dressing these cars." A murmur went through the audience as he indicated that the showroom was reserved for a particular class of individuals. Maggie glanced around at the critical faces, at Blake's arrogant expression, at the owner's apparent endorsement of his staff. She had experienced discrimination in the past, but it had rarely been so overtly public. She said, simply, with dignity, intact but spirits bruised. And as she pushed through the glass doors into the morning sunlight, Maggie took out her phone. Behind her, she heard Blake's voice, which wasn't quite quiet enough. The humiliation hurt, but as she dialed the Collins mansion, which was located on 5 peaceful acres outside of Boston, a tiny, resolute smile sprang on her lips. Its subtle elegance revealed nothing of the billions that owned it. and Alexander Collins preferred it that way at 41 the time. A visionary has transformed the technology for storing renewable energy. Alexander was making a fortune while keeping a purposefully low profile. When Maggie arrived at his home office, he looked up from his desk and put his work down right away. He had learnt to read her facial expressions with accuracy over the course of their 15 years of marriage, so he asked, "What's wrong?" Maggie sank into a leather chair as the events of the morning washed over her. "It's not about me," she concluded. "But how many people get treated that way every day without the comfort of knowing they actually could afford what they're being denied?" She said with a raised smile that didn't reach her eyes. She recounted the experience at the dealership, the condescension, the humiliation, and the blatant discrimination. Alexander's expression darkened as she spoke, allowing her time to process. In their years together, Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "What would you like to do about it?" he asked. "In the end, part of me wants to do nothing," she said, "just buy Caroline's gift elsewhere. But then I think about that young salesman Daniel, who treated me with respect, regardless of how I was dressed. And I think about all the people who face that kind of judgment without having any recourse." She looked directly at Alexander. "These people need to understand that worth isn't determined by appearance, but I don't want vengeance, I want awareness." Alexander nodded slowly as a plan began to take shape. "I think I might have an idea that accomplishes both." Being aware of her husband's protective tendencies, Maggie cautioned, "No, buying the dealership and firing everyone." Alexander laughed. "It's nothing so corny," but perhaps he leaned forward with his eyes sparkling. Together, they came up with a plan that might alter people's perspectives more successfully than simple retaliation. Not for revenge, but for enlightenment. "Are you certain you don't want to come along?" When had they finalized the specifics, Alexander inquired. Maggie shook her head. "It's not that I have to watch their transformation. Rather, it's about their realizing that appearances don't matter." She paused and then added, "But I expect a full report as evening settles over their home." Alexander made a number of phone calls to set the stage for tomorrow morning, which would bring a powerful lesson in humility and the danger of assuming, not just for Blake Thompson, but for everyone at Boston Luxury Motors. If you're enjoying this story, please hit the subscribe button and join our community of story lovers. Let's get back to see what happens next. The weather the next morning was picture perfect. Straightening his trademark blue tie and wearing a confident ID, Blake Thompson entered Boston Luxury Motors. He had made the encounter with the underdressed woman from yesterday into a humorous story that he told his co-workers over drinks. The store glistened under perfectly placed lights, with exotic vehicles set precisely to maximize their allure, and another misguided dreamer who believed she belonged in the realm of luxury. Blake had just concluded the staff meeting for the morning, stressing the value of properly screening consumers. "Keep in mind that he had told the sales team that our time is valuable and that we cater to a specific audience. It's efficiency, not elitism." Blake made a mental note to speak with Daniel, the young salesman, about proper customer assessment at precisely 10:17 a.m. when he remained silent during the meeting, clearly uncomfortable. At that moment, Blake heard the unique purr of an extraordinary engine. Conversation stopped in the middle of sentences as a car unlike any other came to a stop just in front of the main entrance, drawing attention outside through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Blake, who was normally unimpressed by luxury vehicles, given his everyday closeness to them, felt his pulse. It was a custom Rolls Royce Phantom with a midnight blue finish that seemed to change color in the sunlight. According to conservative estimates, it was worth more than $1.2 million. The owner, Richard Mason, had come out of his office, drawn by the sudden silence that the Phantom spoke. Blake reported that a uniformed chauffeur had already left the Rolls Royce and was approaching the entrance in an exceptionally uncommon arrangement. He walked around to open the back passenger door while wearing white gloves. A man with a strong presence came from the car, tall and immaculately dressed in a suit that whispered rather than shouted its five-figure price tag. His salt and pepper. Hair was well-groomed, and his posture was effortlessly powerful. Blake's instinct as a salesperson went into overdrive. These were the kinds of client dealerships who fought for customers whose purchases involved not just one car, but maybe a multi-million-dollar connection in the future. Welcome to Boston Luxury Motors, gentlemen. Good morning. Before any other salespeople could approach Blake Thompson, sales manager, Blake yelled out, grabbing the distinguished visitor. "It's a true joy to have you here with us today," the man said, looking at Ed. Then, with an enigmatic expression, Blake smiled politely, albeit it fell short of his eyes. Alexander Collins only shook hands firmly in response. Blake's thoughts swirled. Rolls Royce disclosed a great deal about the man's financial situation, even though the name sounded somewhat familiar. "Mr. Collins, perhaps I could introduce you to our newest arrivals, of which we recently got a limited edition. It is certainly an honor that you have come to our modest institution today." Blake's rehearsed voice was slightly interrupted when Alexander held up a hand. "I'm here about a specific vehicle, the Azure Coupe Midnight Blue," it said. Blake smiled, more widely. "You made a great pick, sir. It's one of only 15 made this year, and I'd be happy to show you what it is." Alexander smoothly cut in. "When my wife visited yesterday, she showed interest in it." Blake's support for customers. "Your wife, I don't remember. Maybe one of my co-workers helped her." Alexander's face became visibly colder. "No, Mr. Thompson. You helped her, or rather, you refused to help her." His smile stayed fixed, but his eyes fluttered with perplexity. "Margaret Collins. Wearing trousers and a white t-shirt, you indicated that she could feel more at ease while viewing used automobiles." Blake felt the blood drain from his cheeks as he realized that Daniel, who had been hanging close to Mr. Collins, had just let out a little gasp. Richard Mason had already arrived, sensing a scenario building, but Blake fumbled his normally fluid delivery, leaving him on his own. "There must be some misunderstanding. We welcome all clients here." The Blake Alexander then focused on Mr. Mason, the proprietor. "Richard Mason, I assume. Thank you for visiting Boston Luxury Motors. I was just telling Mr. Thompson that my wife came in yesterday hoping to buy the Azure Coupe for her sister. She was treated in a way that bothered me, though. I'm sorry to hear that. I believe I was briefly involved in a conversation, but I wasn't aware of all the details," Richard said, his mood quickly changing from friendly to worried. Alexander gave a thoughtful nod. "The details included your sales manager implying that, based only on her casual attire, people like her don't belong in a place like this. By this point, a small group of other salespeople, support staff, and even a few early customers had gathered, and the showroom had fallen silent." "Mr. Collins," Blake started speaking in a desperate tone, making sure that there was no miscommunication. Everyone turned to watch the young salesman, who appeared shocked by his own bravery, when Daniel abruptly spoke up. "Miss Collins was regularly fired because of her appearance, despite the fact that she was polite and explicit about her interest in the Azure." Blake glared at Daniel, but the damage was already done. Alexander returned to Richard Mason, saying, "You know, it's interesting. My wife found it and runs the Collins Foundation for Children with Disabilities. It's been her life's work since before I met her. She's raised over $50 million for specialized medical equipment and educational programs." He paused to let this sink in. "Maggie dresses simply because she believes in living modestly despite our financial situation. It helps her stay connected to the family she supports, which is one of the many reasons I adore her." Richard Mason was pallid. "Mr. Collins, this does not represent our dealership's principles, I can promise you. We take pride in the fact that Deeds speak louder than words. For Mr. Mason now, Alexander firmly interrupted, saying, I'm not here to buy just one vehicle. I had intended to buy the Azure for my wife's sister as Maggie had requested, but I was also thinking about replacing. Our fleet of 7 corporate vehicles and my personal collection also needed some updating. Blake perked up a little at this, a glimmer of professional hope piercing his anguish. Mason became aware that a sale of that size would enable them to meet their quarterly targets in a single transaction. But Alexander persisted for such a large investment. I find myself wondering if this is the correct establishment. In the showroom, there was complete quiet. Blake had a sickly appearance. Mr. Collins. I can never express how sorry I am for this terrible tragedy. Richard started frantically. Please give us a chance to do this right, because I promise you this is not how we do business. After giving it some thought, Alexander finally answered, Maybe there is a way forward, but it would require more than just selling me cars or anything else. Richard reassured him right away. Funds for a new adaptive sports complex for kids with physical disabilities will be raised at the Collins Foundation's benefit gala next month. Blake said, I think your presence would be educational, turning to the embarrassed sales manager. Alexander added that the organization is constantly seeking volunteers to help with setup so the kids can witness the work being done directly. Blake swallowed hard, sir, and that this was no longer simply about selling vehicles. It was about discovering a basic truth about human worth. Furthermore, Alexander persisted in speaking with Richard Mason. The dealership may want to think about introducing a course on unconscious prejudice. I know a number of great consultants. Richard gave a firm nod, saying that we would be delighted to see such a move as for the cars. After the young salesperson Daniel spoke up, Alexander went to him and said, I would like you to take care of all the paperwork, starting with the Azure for my sister-in-law. I'd be honored, sir. Daniel's eyes widened. Thank you. Alexander finally added, Now, let's talk about the corporate fleet's details. As they made their way to Mason's office, Alexander stopped in front of the Azure and ran his hand down sleek contour. My wife has great taste, doesn't she? Alexander asked. Blake Thompson stood still, his ideal world completely changed, and the harsh reality had finally set in. He had shown his character not by how he treated people he considered significant, but by how he treated people he thought were not. A month later, the Grand Boston Hotel was transformed into a celebration of possibilities by the Collins Foundation Benefit Gala. Near the entrance, families and children with a range of disabilities interacted with benefactors, medical personnel, and supporters. While not wearing his typical outfit, Blake Thompson guided guests and helped a little child in a wheelchair while wearing the event staff costume. He has undergone significant transformation in the last month. As he observed the difficulties these kids face on a daily basis and the dignity with which they greet them across the room, Maggie Collins, who was dressed elegantly in a simple blue dress and who Blake knew, approached him. Blake was once again struck by her lack of pretense. His volunteer work at the foundation had begun as a duty, the cost of professional survival. What is your impression of the experience? Blake took her inquiry seriously, humbling himself before responding as needed. Nodding, Maggie regarding the boy in the wheelchair who is teaching me adaptive basketball. She noticed that Thomas seemed to like you. Blake acknowledged, apparently, I have terrible form. Which made Maggie laugh out loud. He's an honest instructor. Mrs. Collins, Blake's expression became grave. He stated thoughtfully that everyone deserves respect until they prove otherwise, and that there is no excuse for how I treated you. I know I have formally apologized, but I must say it again. I sincerely apologize for how I treated you. You are right. There isn't an excuse, and she agreed, but without malice. The question is, what have you learned that worth isn't determined by appearance, position, or possessions? I imagine Maggie acknowledged the pricey ones as well. It was worth every penny, Blake said earnestly across the room, recalling the significant revenue the dealership had lost when Alexander Collins chose to buy just the Azure and not the extra fleet. Placing a soft touch on his wife's shoulder, Alexander joined them. Blake was merely imparting some of his knowledge. Maggie clarified. Nodding, Alexander, I hear. Yes, sir, you have become fairly involved with the adaptive sports program. In fact, I have signed up to continue volunteering after my required period. He hesitated at first, but eventually added me, and I have been working with Mr. Mason on updating our customer service. Approaching the dealership, Alexander said, no more qualifying by appearance. I'm happy to hear that. And Blake was taken aback when he added, which reminds me of the corporate fleet. I stated that we're still in the market, so maybe you could manage that transaction. Daniel spoke highly of the way you've been his mentor. Blake's expression registered shock before settling into genuine gratitude. I would be honored, Mr. Collins, truly honored later that evening as the event wound down. Blake watched Maggie and Alexander Collins working the room, not flaunting their wealth or influence, but connecting genuinely with each child and family. He reflected on how completely his perception had been transformed a month ago. He would have dismissed someone like Maggie Collins based on her casual appearance. Now he understood that true value ran deeper than designer labels, like cars, or executive titles as Blake helped Thomas back into his wheelchair after a photo session. The boy grinned up at him. You know what, Mr. Blake? You're pretty cool for a grown-up. Blake smiled. Coming from you, Thomas, that's the highest compliment I've received in a very long time, and he meant it. We all make judgments based on appearances, don't we? But as Blake Thompson discovered, looking beyond the surface can reveal extraordinary people and life-changing opportunities. Please click the subscribe button and join our community of story lovers if this story spoke to you. We would love to hear what you think in the comments below. Have you ever made a poor self-judgment or misjudged someone based solely on their appearance? Your life experiences may encourage others, and never forget that the real test of riches is not your bank account, but rather how you treat people when you believe no one else is looking. We'll see you in our next story, which will teach you another vital lesson.